On a military hospital stationed in a distant galaxy, the alien nurse Zyla was taken by surprise when she noticed an unexpected swelling between the legs of her human patient. The hospital was buzzing with activity as doctors rushed to treat numerous soldiers who had been injured in a recent battle. Amidst the chaos, Zyla, a humanoid nurse with radiant emerald green skin, focused on caring for her latest patient. She was intrigued by the unfamiliar features of the unconscious man of a different species, who remained completely still and unresisting in front of her. After reviewing the patient's health monitoring chart, Zyla noted that he had recently suffered a severe head injury and would need rest for a while. She prepared to perform a standard sponge bath, determined to provide the best care, even for patients of species she had little knowledge of. She filled a basin with warm, soapy water and began carefully cleaning the soldier's bruised body. Her gaze was drawn to his solid muscles, which were markedly different from the physique of her own species. A warm sensation spread through her chest as she wondered what it would feel like to be held by such strong arms. Quickly pushing aside any unprofessional thoughts, Zyla continued with her task, moving the sponge lower down his body. Suddenly, she gasped, shocked to see something between his legs swelling at an alarming rate. Nothing in her studies of human anatomy had prepared her for this. Alarmed, Zyla immediately called for a doctor, fearing the patient might be in critical condition. When the doctor arrived and examined the patient, Zyla was stunned to see him burst out laughing. Soon, the other nurses couldn't hold back their laughter either, amused by her bewildered reaction. An older nurse gently explained that this was simply a natural biological reaction for human males and nothing to be worried about. The doctor, still chuckling, congratulated Zyla, teasing her that her gentle touch had elicited a stronger response from the patient than she had expected. Embarrassed, Zyla felt her cheeks flush. She silently reminded herself to stay professional and straightened up, trying to ignore the teasing looks from her colleagues. Despite her embarrassment, after finishing the bath, she couldn't resist glancing at the strange human swelling. The more she observed, the more intrigued she became by humans, sensing they might be even more fascinating than she had first thought. Over the next few days, Zyla found herself volunteering for extra shifts to care for the soldier. She told herself it was just a way to make up for her earlier mistake, but deep down she knew there was more to it. One late night, as she adjusted the patient's pillow, his eyes suddenly opened and locked onto hers. Zyla froze under his intense gaze. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice rough. "You're safe in the hospital," she replied. "You were injured in battle, and we're taking care of you." A faint smile appeared on the soldier's face. "I must have died and gone to heaven because I'm looking at an angel." Zyla blushed, her heart fluttering, unsure if he was being serious or if he was simply delirious. Just then the doctor entered, breaking the moment. "Ah, good to see you awake, Sergeant," the doctor said. "You gave us quite a scare, especially Zyla here. She thought you were on the verge of death." Everyone laughed, including the soldier, who joined in the light-hearted moment. He turned to Zyla with a mischievous look in his eyes. "Nurse," he said playfully, "I'd be happy if you took the time to learn more about my condition." Zyla's face turned crimson, but she managed to keep a composed exterior. Her eyes briefly flickered over the teasing bulge under the blanket, and she bit her lip lightly as their eyes met. The confusion she felt earlier turned into curiosity, and she found herself looking forward to his therapy sessions. As Sergeant Wilde began his recovery, Zyla was always more than willing to oversee his rehabilitation. She told herself it was purely professional, but every time she was near him, a warm feeling stirred in her heart. Wilde smiled when he saw Zyla enter the room, his gaze appreciative. "Hello, my favorite nurse. Ready to help me get back in shape?" he asked with a playful tone. Zyla smiled softly, determined to maintain professionalism. "Of course, Sergeant. We'll start with some basic exercises." As she guided him through his workout, Zyla couldn't help but admire the way his muscles flexed beneath his tight clothing. She lingered longer than necessary whenever she adjusted his posture, feeling the warmth of his body through her fingertips. Wilde seemed to enjoy her attention, stretching out in exaggerated ways and flashing a humorous expression each time she corrected him. "Nurse," he teased, "you're really putting me through my paces. Maybe I need some special care after all this. Zyla rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a small smile. I think you'll survive. Tough, Sergeant, she replied, trying to remain professional. When she handed him a resistance band, she accidentally brushed his hand, and Wild took a deep breath, his tension obvious. As he began the exercise, Zyla couldn't help but notice the spark in his eyes. Wild caught her watching him and smirked. See something you like, nurse? He asked, his voice teasing. Zyla's cheeks turned an emerald shade, but she couldn't resist the challenge he presented. Just admiring your form, she replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. You're making great progress, Sergeant, she said with a light tone as he flashed a confident grin and flexed his biceps for emphasis. But I think I might need some help with the next exercise. Zyla's heart raced as she moved closer, placing her hands on his hips to guide him into a deep squat. The warmth of his body seeped through her palms, and she felt a spark of heat inside her. As he performed an especially deep squat, he suddenly lost his balance, falling backward and pulling her down with him. They landed in a tangled heap on the mat, with Zyla lying on Wild's chest. For a moment, neither of them moved, breathing heavily as they locked eyes, just inches apart. She could feel his heart pounding beneath her. Wild whispered softly, I think I'm falling for you. Zyla swallowed hard, her entire body trembling with unspoken desire. Sergeant, we shouldn't, she stammered, but Wild silenced her protest with a passionate kiss. She melted into his embrace, her thoughts of propriety and distance fading away as she surrendered to the overwhelming feeling he ignited in her. His hands wandered over her body, igniting a warmth inside her. When his fingers brushed over her chest through the thin fabric of her uniform, she couldn't help but press closer to him, seeking more of that connection. Just as Wild began to unzip her uniform, a soft cough from the doorway startled them both. They pulled apart in a hurry. Zyla quickly stood, straightening her hair and adjusting her uniform, while Wild sat up, a sheepish smile on his face. I hope I'm not interrupting anything, the doctor said with a knowing smile, eyeing their disheveled appearance. Not at all, Zyla replied, her voice slightly higher than usual. We were just doing some muscle strengthening exercises. The doctor shook his head with a chuckle. Well, carry on, but remember to keep it professional. After the doctor left, Zyla turned back to look at Wild. A mix of embarrassment and unfulfilled desire made her cheeks flush. We can't keep doing this, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's too risky. Wild gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his gaze full of tenderness, and it made her heart ache. But it feels so right, he murmured. I've never wanted anyone like I want you. Zyla closed her eyes, torn between her duty and the undeniable attraction she felt for him. Falling for a patient was wrong, but the desire was too powerful to ignore. With a sigh, she reluctantly stepped back, creating the necessary distance between them. She knew she needed to focus on helping Sergeant Wild recover, even though she couldn't deny that her life had become more complicated and more interesting since meeting him. Each therapy session with Wild left her constantly thinking about the connection they shared. His playful and charming remarks kept her looking forward to their time together, finding any excuse to be near him. One day, on her way to Wild's room, Zyla heard a strange noise coming from the bathroom. Concerned that something had happened to him, she rushed in without hesitation. What she saw made her freeze, her cheeks turning a deep shade of green. Wild stood naked in the bathroom, looking completely relaxed as he pleasured himself with slow, deliberate movements. Zyla stood frozen, breathless, as their eyes locked in an awkward silence. After a moment, Wild flashed a grin, completely unashamed. Hello, nurse. Care to join me? Her face flushed deeper, and she quickly turned away. I'm so sorry, Sergeant. I thought you might have hurt yourself and didn't mean to intrude. Wild chuckled, turning off the water and reaching for a towel. No need to apologize. I'd be happy to give you a private show anytime. Zyla stammered another apology before hurrying out of the room, her heart pounding as the image of Wild in that state lingered in her mind. Later, during their therapy session, Zyla tried to act like everything was normal, but her mind was still filled with images of Wild, his defined muscles, and the way his body had felt. Every time their eyes met, she couldn't help but feel flustered, and Wild seemed to take pleasure in her nervousness. As she guided him through some stretches, he moved closer, his warm breath brushing against her ear. "If you want to learn more about my anatomy, all you have to do." "Is that what you're asking?" he teased. Zyla almost lost her balance, trembling, and awkwardly responded, "Sergeant, please, I'm trying to keep things professional here." Wild gave a mischievous smile. "I'm just trying to help you relax a little, nurse. We both know there's something special between us. Why fight it?" Zyla sighed, torn between her growing feelings for Wild and her responsibilities as a medical professional. "It's not that simple. I have duties, and you're my patient. It wouldn't be appropriate," she explained. However, Wild sat up, his expression turning serious. "Zyla, I understand your hesitation, but life is too short to ignore chances for happiness. I'm not just looking for a casual fling. I genuinely care about you." Zyla's heart raced at his sincere words, and she found herself leaning into his warm touch as he gently stroked her cheek. "I care about you too, maybe more than I should," she confessed, making Wild smile tenderly. "Then let's let things happen naturally. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people exploring this special connection," he said. Zyla hesitated for a moment, but then let go of her reservations, gently pressing her lips to his. The kiss was tender and sweet, and Wild responded passionately, pulling her close until they were both breathless. When they parted, Zyla rested her forehead against his, a satisfied smile on her face. "Maybe we can try this, but it has to be discreet. I don't want to risk my job or your recovery." Wild smiled and stole another quick kiss. "Your secret is safe with me, nurse. And about that private anatomy lesson." Zyla playfully tapped his chest, teasing him. She knew that pursuing a relationship with Wild would be a challenge, but she felt every obstacle they faced together would be worth it. Somehow, she believed they could get through anything as long as they were together. Zyla's curiosity about human affection grew stronger. It all started when she was searching for a medical reference book in the hospital's rarely used library section. While sifting through dusty shelves, she discovered a small, unmarked box tucked away in a corner. She pulled it out and gasped upon opening it, finding a collection of human erotic literature, ranging from steamy romance novels to detailed guides. Her cheeks flushed deep crimson as she flipped through the pages, her heart racing at the provocative images and descriptions. From that moment on, Zyla often snuck into the library during her breaks, devouring the books with a mix of fascination and excitement. She was surprised by the complexity of human anatomy and the creative expressions of desire. Over time, Zyla began to incorporate her new knowledge into her therapy sessions with Wild. She would let her touch linger on him, her hands resting just a bit longer than necessary. "You know, Sergeant," she said in a low, sultry tone, her fingers lightly tracing his arm as she helped him stretch. "I read something interesting about male stamina last night. Apparently, you're marathon runners in the bedroom." Wild grinned broadly, his eyes dark with desire. "Well, nurse, looks like someone's been doing her homework," he replied. "I'd be happy to give you a more thorough lesson anytime." Zyla leaned in, her warm breath brushing his ear. "Is that a promise or a challenge, Sergeant?" she asked. Wild growled softly and squeezed her waist. "I never back down." Their flirtation grew bolder and more provocative with each passing day. The tension between them was thick, crackling like electricity, drawing them closer with each interaction. Zyla found herself longing to be close to Wild in ways she had never experienced before. One afternoon, as she guided him through stretching exercises, she couldn't resist letting her hands explore the contours of his chest and abdomen. "You're in great shape, Sergeant," she murmured, impressed. "I can really feel the strength in you." Wild smiled, flexing his muscles in response to her touch. "I've been spending extra time in the gym to make sure I'm in top form for my favorite nurse," he said in a low, sultry voice. Zyla bit her lip, desire pulsing through her. "So, what's on your mind, Sergeant?" she asked playfully. Wild replied in a husky voice. Oh, I bet you'd love to share those thoughts with the whole class." Before Zyla could respond, the sound of footsteps in the hallway broke the tension. She quickly stepped back, adjusted her uniform, and tried to steady her breathing. In the days that followed, Zyla noticed Wild becoming increasingly frustrated with the slow pace of his recovery, which made him quiet and irritable. She realized she needed to do something to lift his spirits and reignite the passion they had shared. Inspired by a sensual scene in one of the novels she had read, Zyla decided to organize a special therapy session for Wild. She dimmed the lights in the room, lit a few scented candles, and set up a playlist with seductive music. When Wild entered, his jaw dropped at the sight of Zyla, wearing a form-fitting nurse's uniform, the neckline cut low to reveal a tantalizing glimpse of her cleavage. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice thick with desire. Zyla stepped closer to him, her eyes full of intent. She swayed her hips sensually, leaning into Wild. "Tonight we can try a different kind of therapy," she whispered, her hands sliding over his chest. "Something to help you relax and unwind." She guided him to the bed and gestured for him to lie down. "Sergeant," she purred with a mischievous smile, "I think tonight you're going to be my unruly patient. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to follow all my orders. Do you think you can handle that?" Wild's smile turned predatory. "Oh, I can handle anything you throw at me, nurse. Bring it on." Zyla pressed her fingertips gently against his chest, her tone teasing. "Let's begin with a little anatomy lesson, shall we?" Wild gasped as she let her hand glide down, guiding it to where he most wanted to be touched. "Right there," he murmured, his eyes closing in bliss. Zyla chuckled softly, her fingers tracing along the taut lines of his body. "My, it seems we have a very eager student here. Let's see how well you follow instructions." That night was filled with laughter and discovery as they lost themselves in their playful game. Zyla delighting in hearing Wild beg to touch her, rewarding him with waves of pleasure as he obeyed. Lying together afterward, basking in the afterglow of happiness, Wild kissed Zyla's forehead. "I can't believe it," he murmured, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You're incredible." Zyla smiled, snuggling into his chest. "You're not too bad yourself, Sergeant. I'm glad I could help you forget everything for a while." Wild chuckled, his hand lazily tracing gentle lines along her back. "Oh, you definitely did that. In fact, I might need this kind of therapy more often." Zyla laughed, nipping playfully at his jaw. "It's my duty as a nurse to make sure you recover completely and thoroughly." In the days that followed, Zyla and Wild continued to explore their growing relationship, both physically and emotionally. They shared stories about their pasts, their hopes, and their dreams, understanding each other more deeply with every conversation. Their relationship became harder to keep a secret, and stolen glances and light touches became a thrilling game of cat and mouse, each daring the other to push boundaries. However, their secret affair did not go unnoticed. Dr. Hackson, a senior doctor known for his strict adherence to protocols, observed Zyla's interactions with Wild and grew increasingly suspicious. One day, after a particularly intense therapy session, Dr. Mike Hackson intercepted Zyla in the hallway as she was leaving Wild's room. "Nurse Zyla," he said, his tone cold and accusatory. "I couldn't help but notice the amount of time you've been spending with your human patient. Is there something I should know?" Zyla's heart pounded, but she maintained her composure, replying without hesitation. "Nothing at all, Dr. Hackson. I'm simply ensuring that Sergeant Wild receives the best care possible during his recovery." Dr. Hackson's eyes narrowed, clearly unconvinced. "I see. And this care often involves intimate touches and whispered conversations?" Zyla's cheeks flushed a deep red, but she stood her ground. "I assure you, Doctor, my relationship with Sergeant Wild is entirely professional. I would never compromise my duty as a nurse." Dr. Hackson leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I will be watching your care of Wild very closely. One wrong step, and I won't hesitate to report your inappropriate behavior to the hospital board." He turned and walked away, leaving Zyla shaken and anxious. She knew she had to be more careful, but the thought of giving up her newfound connection with Wild was too painful to bear. That night, Zyla confided in Wild about her confrontation with Dr. Hackson. They lay together on his hospital bed, Wild's warm embrace temporarily soothing her fears. "I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling. "If Dr. Hackson finds out, I could lose my job, and you could be transferred." Wild pulled her closer, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "We'll get through this, Zyla. I won't let anyone tear us apart, especially not some stiff doctor." Zyla laughed quietly at his vivid description, feeling a bit of tension lift. "I just wish we didn't have to keep our feelings a secret. Sneaking around like this is so frustrating." Wild gently cupped her face, his eyes firm with resolve. Then let's stop hiding it. I'm ready to face any consequences as long as I have you by my side. Xyla's heart swelled with love and gratitude, though a lingering fear remained. I want that more than anything, but what if they separate us? What if we never get to see each other again? Wild silenced her worries with a deep kiss, and when they pulled apart, both breathless and blushing, he rested his forehead against hers. I won't let that happen, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. I love you, Xyla, and I'll fight for us, no matter what. Xyla's eyes widened, her heart soaring. I love you too, Wild, more than I ever thought was possible. They spent the rest of the night in each other's arms, their love serving as a shield against an uncertain future. In the days that followed, Xyla and Wild became more careful in how they acted around others, maintaining a professional front. Yet the stolen moments behind closed doors only deepened their connection. Dr. Hackson kept a close eye on them, his suspicions growing. He started questioning other staff members, trying to gather enough evidence to bring the matter before the hospital board. Xyla knew it was only a matter of time before their secret came to light, but she refused to let fear control her. She focused on providing the best care for Wild, both as his nurse and his lover. One afternoon, as Xyla was helping Wild in his room, the door suddenly swung open. Dr. Hackson stormed in, a triumphant grin on his face. I knew it, he declared, pointing an accusing finger at them. I've caught you, Nurse Xyla. Your inappropriate relationship with this patient ends now. Xyla's heart sank, but before she could say anything, Wild spoke up, his voice calm and steady. Dr. Hackson, I understand your concern, but I assure you, my relationship with Nurse Xyla hasn't affected my care or her professionalism. In fact, her dedication has been essential to my recovery. Dr. Hackson was unyielding. Save your excuses, Sergeant. The hospital has strict policies against staff getting too familiar with patients. Nurse Xyla will face disciplinary action, and you, Sergeant, will be transferred to another facility immediately. Xyla's heart raced, the thought of losing Wild overwhelming her. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw determination. Wild squeezed her hand and gave her a reassuring look. I can't let you do that, he said firmly. Nurse Xyla and I are more than just patient and nurse. We love each other, and we're ready to fight for our relationship, no matter what it costs. Dr. Hackson's face turned red with rage. This is unacceptable. I'll have both of you removed from this hospital. Before he could act on his threat, a voice interrupted from the doorway. I don't think that will be necessary, Dr. Hackson. They turned to see the hospital director, a woman with a commanding presence and piercing blue eyes. I've been following this situation closely, she said, her gaze moving between Xyla and Wild, and I see no evidence that their relationship has harmed anyone. In fact, I believe it has been a source of strength and healing for both of them. Dr. Hackson scowled, protesting, but the policies. The hospital director raised her hand to silence him. The policies are in place to protect our patients and staff, not to punish them for finding love and support in hard times. As long as Nurse Xyla and Sergeant Wild maintain professionalism at work, there's no reason to interfere with their personal lives. A wave of relief washed over Xyla, her eyes brimming with tears of gratitude. She looked at Wild, who smiled at her with love and pride. Realizing he had lost, Dr. Hackson grumbled angrily and stormed out of the room. The hospital director turned to Xyla and gave her a kind smile. I wish you both the best, and Sergeant Wild, I hope you make a full recovery. We need more fighters like you out there. With that, she left, leaving the couple alone again. Xyla threw her arms around Wild, laughing and crying at the same time. I can't believe it, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. We did it. We're going to be okay. Wild held her close. His voice, filled with love and joy, echoed, I promised you I'd fight for you, Xyla, and I always keep my word. They stayed in each other's warm embrace, aware that their journey together had just begun, with many challenges and obstacles ahead. But with Wild by her side, Xyla felt they could conquer anything, even the entire galaxy. Together, they would build a future full of laughter, love, and endless possibilities. It all started with a surprising discovery and an unexpected turn of events. As time passed, Xyla and Wild's love continued to grow. No longer needing to keep their relationship a secret, they enjoyed the freedom to express their feelings openly. Wild's recovery was progressing well, thanks to Zyla's dedicated care and unwavering support. As he regained his strength and mobility, Wild began thinking about the future, one he couldn't imagine without Zyla by his side. One afternoon, while Zyla was preoccupied, Wild secretly enlisted the help of his fellow soldiers and hospital staff to plan the perfect proposal. They worked hard to transform the hospital garden, setting up sparkling lights, playing soft music, and creating a canopy of stars above. Wild spent hours rehearsing his speech, wanting every word to express his deep emotions. He paced nervously, his palms sweating and heart racing, as the moment approached. Taking Zyla's hand, he led her to the garden, his eyes glowing with love and excitement. Zyla gasped in awe at the beautiful scene. The garden had been transformed into a romantic haven, with soft lights casting a warm glow over the flowers and trees. Her eyes widened in surprise as she asked, "What is all of this?" Wild smiled, his heart full of pride and love. "This is everything I feel for you, a small token of gratitude for everything you've done for me." He led her to a bench beneath the starry canopy, his hands trembling slightly as he took a deep breath. "Zyla," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "From the moment I opened my eyes and saw your face, I knew my life would be forever changed. You are my guide, my reason to be a better man." Zyla's eyes shimmered with tears, her heart pounding as she listened intently to every word. "I never knew what true love was until I met you," Wild continued, his voice growing steadier. "You've taught me about dedication, compassion, and steadfast support. You've been with me every step of the way in my recovery, and I know I wouldn't be here today without you." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, his hands shaking with anticipation. "Zyla, I can't imagine my life without you. I want to wake up every morning to your smile and fall asleep every night with you in my arms. I want to build a life with you, filled with laughter, love, and endless adventures." He opened the box, revealing a sparkling ring that shone under the starlight. "Zyla, my love, my soulmate, will you marry me? Will you be my partner, my love, and my best friend for life?" Tears streamed down Zyla's face as she nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Wild, yes, 1,000 times yes." He gently placed the ring on her finger, his own eyes shining with happiness. They embraced, their hearts in perfect harmony, a strength that could overcome any obstacle. As they pulled back, both of them beamed with joy. Wild's eyes twinkled mischievously. "You know, Zyla, I promise to keep surprising you with endless joys for the rest of our lives." Zyla laughed, playfully punching him in the chest. "You always have to remind me of that, don't you?" Wild laughed and pulled her closer. "Well, it's part of our story now, ever since you discovered the wonders of human anatomy." Zyla blushed, resting her head on his chest. "Back then, I was so naive. I can't believe I thought you were dying." Wild kissed the top of her head gently, his voice soft and sincere. "But look at how far we've come. You've not only learned about human biology, but also about love and resilience." Zyla looked up at him, her eyes full of love and admiration. "And you've taught me about courage, endurance, and unwavering commitment." Pride filled Zyla as she thought about the man Wild was becoming, and she felt honored to soon become his wife. Their engagement was sealed with a passionate kiss, their bodies entwined as if they were destined to be together. The stars above seemed to shine even brighter, as if the universe itself was celebrating their love. As they returned to the hospital, Zyla couldn't stop admiring the ring on her finger, a symbol of their unbreakable bond. "I can't wait to start planning our wedding," she said excitedly, her mind racing with ideas about venues, colors, and dresses. Wild chuckled at her enthusiasm. "As long as you're by my side, I don't care if we have to get married in a broom closet." He leaned in closer, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "But I have one request. Wear your sexy nurse uniform to the ceremony." Zyla blushed deeply, her cheeks turning bright red. "I can't wear that to our wedding." Wild laughed, pulling her closer and nuzzling into her neck. "I know. I'm just dreaming." They continued to tease each other as they made their way back to Wild's room, their hearts overflowing with joy. That night, lying together with their bodies glistening with sweat and hearts racing, Zyla traced her fingers along his chest, a satisfied smile on her face. "I can't believe we're getting married," she whispered, her voice full of wonder and happiness. Wild kissed her forehead gently, his hand caressing the curve of her hip. Believe it, my love. You're stuck with me now with all of these wild moments, Wild said with a mischievous grin. Zyla smirked, her eyes gleaming playfully. Speaking of which, do you think we need another anatomy lesson? Her hand slid down to find his tense body. Wild groaned, instinctively pressing his hips into her. You're a wild woman, he growled, his voice thick with desire. Zyla smiled teasingly, her hand gliding slowly over him. Their laughter soon turned into sighs of pleasure as they came together once more. Their bodies moved in perfect rhythm, their love shining as brightly as the stars in the sky. As they drifted to sleep, wrapped in each other's warmth, they knew their journey was just beginning. A journey filled with laughter, love, and endless surprises.